and it is going to be presented. It's medical management, something which all of us clinicians and PGs manage in our day-to-day practice. And Dr. Maya Modawala, he will be giving us a good overview on the medical management of glaucoma. And your questions you can type in the chat list, and we may take it in between, but most of the questions will take it after Dr. Mayab has finished his talk. So Mayab, please go ahead.
Yeah. So good evening, one and all. My topic for today is an overview of glaucoma management. First of all, I'd like to thank Swapnesh, Dr. Preetham for having this lecture series and for inviting me to speak on something like this. And of course, Dr. Sumit for coordinating and Dr. Preeti for moderating this session.
Mayab, your voice is not very clear.
Still not clear?
No, it's very low.
Now is it better?
Yeah. It's very good. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I need to speak a little louder, that's all. Thank you. So my name is Dr. Maya Modawala. I just want to introduce myself. I've done my post-graduation and fellowship in glaucoma from Shankar Nethralaya. And I was working as a consultant in the cataract and glaucoma services in Shankar Nethralaya, Kolkata for 3 years. Been practicing in Bombay at my own clinic at Santa Cruz, and I've been working in Lotus Eye Hospital, Juhu for the past 2 years. Would like to invite everybody for this talk. A couple of things itself that I'm going to be speaking on glaucoma management and overview. As we all know that glaucoma management is not is like an ocean. It will take few days to complete it completely. So I'll be focusing on certain important questions, certain important parts which are important to postgraduates, but certain important clinical tips as well, which regular ophthalmologists and other people can also pick up in their day-to-day practice. Again, just a word of caution to all the postgraduates. None of the books behind are anything related to ophthalmology or glaucoma at all. So you don't have to think that you have to read so much to become an ophthalmologist. These are just regular books. So we start with glaucoma and the definition of glaucoma, which is defined as a chronic progressive optic neuropathy, which is associated with characteristic optic nerve head changes with corresponding visual field defects, in which raised intraocular pressure is a major modifiable risk factor. The definition is self-explanatory, and every word of it is important, so nothing can be missed out if asked in an exam. Diagnosis and treatment of glaucoma is challenging and requires an algorithmic step-ladder approach towards it. We just quickly look at the burden of glaucoma in the country, where in 2014-15, when this paper came out, there were almost 11 million people suffering glaucoma. And they estimated that by the time we reach 2035, 2040, the number may very well go up to almost 35 to 40 million. So we are in the process of getting into an epidemic of glaucoma in the next decade or so. These are the prevalence of primary open-angle glaucomas according to studies done in India, which ranges anywhere between 2 to 3%. As far as prevalence of primary angle closure disease is concerned, that involves primary angle closure suspects, primary angle closures, and primary angle closures glaucoma. The Chennai glaucoma study, rural and urban, gave us an approximate prevalence of around almost between 10 to 12%. That tells us that approximately 1 in 12 people have some form of angle closure disease. And also bilateral blindness due to PSEG or angle closure disease is almost twice as compared to open angle disease. So our aim of treatment of glaucoma basically is divided into something which is used. One is to preserve vision. Second is to maintain the quality of life. The third is that if we are unable to maintain progression of a patient at zero, at least we should reduce the rate to such a way that the functional vision should outlast the age of the patient. We should treat patient as a whole, giving maximum benefit with minimum side effects. So these are the principles on which treatment of glaucoma is based on. First is that we have to establish a diagnosis, establish a baseline IOP, set a target IOP, then initiate therapy. To get the baseline IOP to the target IOP, we need to follow up the individual. I cannot emphasize this further, that treatment for glaucoma is highly individualized. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all strategy. Every person is different. Every person's pressures are different. Every person's glaucoma is different. So the treatment differs from person to person. So the treatment strategies basically in primary glaucomas are either medical management and lasers, which constitute anywhere between 70 to 80% of our entire management armamentarium. And surgical treatment is around 20 to 30% cases. So in this topic of mine, I'll be speaking more on medical management lasers and few slides on surgical treatment, which are important from a viva or student question point of view. Along with this, secondary glaucomas also require additional treatment strategies apart from only reduction of IOP. And normal tension glaucoma requires a more all-round approach in diagnosis and treatment. So the evaluation protocol of any patient when we are assessing for glaucoma is a detailed history taking, including family history of glaucoma, a visual acuity testing, a thorough slit lamp examination all the way from the cornea to the anterior vitreous. Goldman's applanation tonometry or GAT is the gold standard for IOP measurement for any patient of glaucoma. Every other method only as a screening tool, but any decision making should only be done on a Goldman's applanation tonometry. And even in these COVID times, it has been shown that the GAT is the safest as far as IOP measurement is concerned, especially if you clean the head properly, because other methods can produce aerosols. A proper gonioscopy with a 4-mirror lens, retina evaluation including the periphery, proper disc evaluation with a 78 or 90 lens, investigations like central corneal thickness, structural investigations like OCT, and functional investigations like perimetry, which were covered in yesterday's topic. All these are important data points when we are considering management of a glaucoma patient, and every one of them has to be taken into account. So in this, if we are looking at a flowchart in the open angle glaucoma segment, you have a patient who's suspected of glaucoma. You've done all the evaluation algorithm and you found out an open angle on gonioscopy, and his IOP at that point of time was found to be more than 22 millimeter mercury. You assess his disc and visual field, everything is normal. So that comes under the criteria of ocular hypertension. His disc shows some changes, visual field shows corresponding defects, it comes under primary open angle glaucoma. And a patient with pressures less than 21 with disc and field changes corresponding to have glaucoma comes under normotension glaucoma. So although this is very broadly classified, but still this gives you an idea as to what the open angle glaucoma segment approach should be. So when we look at baseline IOP, that is the IOP at which damage has occurred for a patient, a single reading is not accurate. As we all know that IOP fluctuates throughout the day, fluctuates up to 6 millimeter mercury, even in normal patients, and almost up to 9 millimeter mercury in glaucoma patients. So patient comes to your OPD and you take one reading that is not accurate at his baseline IOP, you require a range. Therefore, multiple readings done at different points of the time. You have a patient, the same patient comes at 2 in the afternoon one day. Next time you call them at 5 in the evening. Then you call them at 8 in the evening. So you have multiple readings throughout the day, gives you a better idea what his fluctuation and baseline IOP is. Or diurnal variation test can also be done, but doing this for every patient will be difficult because you don't have that much time. Patients do not have that much time. Goldman applanation tonometry is a must, I've already explained. And the baseline IOP helps us in formulating the target IOP. So when we are looking at we have a patient, you have a baseline IOP, you've checked his visual field, his discs are normal. So it comes under the category of an ocular hypertension. So when it comes to treatment of ocular hypertension, the ocular hypertension treatment study is the gold standard by which we treat these patients. And the study told us that if you have a 20% drop in IOP in treated patients, the risk of conversion of ocular hypertension to primary open angle glaucoma is around 4.4%. And this almost doubles to 9.5% in untreated eyes. So what this tells us that clearly that treating ocular hypertensives reduces the risk of developing POAG by almost twice. But the data also tells us that out of 100% untreated patients, only 9.5% progress. That means almost 90% did not progress at all. Does this mean we need to treat all ocular hypertensives? No. We need to figure out which are more at risk of converting to POAG and treat them accordingly. So the AWACE TS gave us important risk factors like older age, higher IOP, larger cup to disc ratio, higher pattern standard deviation, and a very important risk factor, which is thinner central corneal thickness. So we'll just look at what is the relation of central corneal thickness and glaucoma, where the OHTS again told us very clearly that for every 40 micron reduction of CCT, the risk of developing POG almost is 1.7 times more. Eyes with central corneal thickness of less than 555 micron are almost 3 times more likely of developing POG. So if we have a patient whose IOP is in the range of 17, 18 always, you think it's a normotension glaucoma, but the pachymetry of the patient, central corneal thickness is 470, 480, it can actually be reclassified as a primary open angle glaucoma. Important for again PG students is that there is no formula for giving corrected IOP values. We only use it as a guideline. Thicker corneas are protective, thinner corneas are more prone and require closer follow-up, but we don't sit and calculate actual corrected IOP values because they have shown not to be of any major significance. Now you have the primary open angle glaucoma segment where you've seen an eye, you've have this damage, you've done perimetry, all these points have been covered already, pressure has been high, and you know this is a primary open angle glaucoma. Now you just quantify it based on the perimetry. Again, this is quite a broad classification that all those having mean deviation of 0 to -6 are mild, moderate is -6 to -12, and severe is more than -12 decibels according to the perimetry. So you've got established diagnosis, you've got a baseline IOP. Now you think about target IOP. So target IOP is that IOP at which the patient's progression or the increase in glaucoma is reduced. So ocular hypertension treatment study gave us a target IOP of 20% for ocular hypertensives, and the collaborative normotension glaucoma study gave us a 30% IOP drop in normotension glaucoma. Rule of thumb again is that in mild glaucoma, you look for a 20% drop. In moderate glaucomas, you look for 30% drop. And in severe glaucomas, you look for 40% drop in IOP. Again, this changes from patient to patient. This is just broadly I'm explaining. And as I said, IOP at which progression of disease is halted with minimal impact on quality of life. The early manifest glaucoma treatment gave us complex formula for calculation of target IOP, which are not really clinically applicable. So the factors which come into play when we are discussing target IOP calculation, one is what is the damage to the nerve? What is the functional damage of the perimetry? We look at the baseline IOP, which is already seen at which the pressure, at which damage occurred. Age of a patient. Age of a patient is very important. For example, if you have a patient at 75 and a patient at age of 50, both have similar glaucomas at that point of time. The target IOP for the patient who's 50 will always be more tighter, more lower, because he has a more extensive life expectancy compared to the person at 75 who doesn't require very low target IOP. Additional risk factors, hypertension, diabetes, usage of other systemic medications. Again, to remember, target IOP for every individual is different and is dynamic in nature. It's not that one person you set a target IOP, that remains that person's target IOP for the rest of his life. You have progression even at your target IOP, you need to reduce it further. Also, contrarily, if you find that his glaucoma has really been stable for a long time and you want to reduce some medication and raise the target IOP, you can do that as well. So once you've got your target IOP, you know what your target IOP is to be, you sort of start initiating therapy. And topical anti-glaucoma medications is the most important as far as reducing IOP in an open angle segment is concerned. So we start appropriate anti-glaucoma medications which give us a 24-hour control, keep side effect profile as minimal as possible, cost minimal, long-term impact on quality of life should be kept in mind. While starting, we can start with something called as a unilateral drug trial. Although I think this is more of a viva question for postgraduates, where you start a drug in one particular eye of the patient, look for the effect of the drug in that eye, and then start the drug in the other eye as well. So this gives you an idea about the efficacy of the drug and also the fluctuation of IOP. I'll give you an example that if you have pressure of 24 in both the eyes and you want to start off treatment, you start off treatment only in one eye, which is the right eye, and you call back the patient to check the IOP after 3 weeks. At that point of time, if pressure in both eyes is 22 or 21, you know this is more of a fluctuation and the drug is not active. Contrary, in the same patient, if the treated eye IOP reduces to 17, 18, you know this drug has acted, it's not a fluctuation, and you can start this in the other eye as well. However, this takes time and is not really that clinically applicable. In fact, a reverse drug trial is more applicable, that you have a patient coming to you with multiple medications, multiple prescriptions, but no records, no perimetries, and doesn't have any idea what his IOP is like. So you can stop the drug sequentially and then check what his IOP is and then start afresh from there, which is called as a reverse drug trial. So I'll be going through few glaucoma medications, and a lot of it will be theoretical, which I'm not covering. I'll be just looking at major points which are asked in vivas and of course, clinically applicable points. So this is the timeline of anti-glaucoma medications, where pilocarpine, which was the earliest one, followed by timolol, which was again the gold standard of medications for a long time, followed last by PG analogs in the current Indian market, where the PG analogs are still the latest one as far as pressure reduction is concerned. So PG analogs or prostaglandin analogs are the most common, and since are the #1 choice as far as treatment of primary open angle glaucoma is concerned, because they have IOP reduction of almost 30%. They have a duration of action which lasts almost for the entire day. So use it only once a day as compliance is ensured. Latanoprost, metoprost, travoprost have been there, and newly come in the market is tafluprost. The washout period is important because any drug which you're given still remains in the system and causes an effect of lowering IOP. So in case you're stopping the drug, you need to wait at least till the washout period is over for us to understand that the effect of the drug is no longer existing. Quick mechanism of action that increases the uvascleral outflow and reduces the extracellular matrix by activation of matrix metalloproteinases. Common side effects most commonly seen are conjunctival hyperemia, iris lengthening, and pigmentation. Important side effects and contraindications are any patient of uveitis. There can be reactivation of the uveitis. Any herpetic eye disease, especially herpetic keratitis, herpetic keratouveitis, can be reactivated by prostaglandin analog. CME, again, that's why it is to be used carefully in post-operative patients. If you have done cataract surgery for a patient who's on a prostaglandin analog, it's better to shift him for the first 4 to 6 weeks to some other drug and then get him back again after the surgery to reduce the incidence of cystoid macular edema. Prostaglandin associated periorbitopathy again is a recent advance and a recently noted complication or side effect of PG analog, which can be asked as a question in the Viva, where if you see this patient, he's been on unilateral bimatoprost for a few months, and this eye has not been on bimatoprost. You can clearly see there's a difference between the two eyes, where there is deepening of the superior sulcus here. There is associated with ptosis, and you can see the eye being pushed back, causing enophthalmos. So what happens in this is because of the the prostaglandin, it acts on the PGF receptors in the orbital fat and in the orbit, and causes reduction in the orbital fat and the adipocytes, which causes this particular picture. It also acts on the LPS and the Mueller's muscle and causes ptosis. Beta blockers, the most commonly seen is timolol maleate, which is used in a concentration of 0.5%, which is a non-selective beta blocker, and betaxolol is a selective beta blocker, which is again used in 0.5%. Washout period is almost of 1 month. A mechanism of action is reduces aqueous humor secretion by acting on the beta receptors. Important adverse effects being a little bit of local hyperemia and congestion, and again an important Viva question: and what is short-term escape and long-term drift? So in short-term escape is that when you start a patient on timolol, in the initial few weeks there is no therapeutic effect, and this happens because of receptor saturation. The beta receptors get saturated, and therefore the therapeutic effect is not seen. And long-term drift is then when patients have been on a beta blocker for a long period of time, for a few months or few years. There is something which is called as tachyphylaxis, which happens, and there is an alteration in the protein signaling pathway, and it reduces the efficacy of timolol in these patients. So you give a timolol holiday to these patients. You stop timolol for a few months, and then you come back to it again later on after some time. Very important contraindications of patients where you should use it very carefully is patient of any sinus bradycardia or any heart block, and especially patient of bronchial asthma or severe COPD, this can lead to exacerbations of their current situations. In these situations, using a cardioselective like betaxolol 0.5% can be used in these patients, but the therapeutic effect is less as compared to timolol. Alpha agonists, brimonidine being the most important in this class. A lot of people, students get confused regarding the different concentrations, and I'll just explain about it. That alphagen, which is, I don't have any financial interest, but alphagen is, plain alphagen is 0.2%, alphagen P is 0.15%, and alphagen Z is 0.1%. So the percentage of brimonidine reduces, which does not have an effect on its efficacy, but it reduces its side effect profile. A 1-drop BD or TDS with a washout period of 3 weeks. Most common local adverse effect in these patients is brimonidine allergy or a follicular conjunctivitis, which is seen very commonly along with the contact dermatitis, and it looks something like this, where you see follicles, papillae, and localized congestion. Important systemic effect is it causes apneic smells or somnolence in children, because it crosses the blood-brain barrier in them. So definitely should not be used in young children. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, topical, basically dorzolamide, temozolomide, reduce aqueous suppression. Important adverse effect of dorzolamide is it causes dermatitis, periocular dermatitis. But very important again that because it acts on the carbonic anhydrase 2 enzyme, which is present in the corneal endothelium, it can increase decompensation because the endothelium pump stops functioning. So any patient of Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, or any patient of pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, or basically any patient who's decompensating, we should avoid this drug. So this is a patient showing typical dermatitis because of contact dermatitis because of dorzolamide. You see thin papery skin, and patient complains of severe itching and rubbing. A systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is basically acetazolamide, which is dose of 20 milligram per kg per day. For a 60 to 70 kg adult, the 250 milligram capsule 4 times a day is what can be given. Peak effect happens in 2 hours, and the washout period is anywhere around 72 hours. So this is indicated when IOP needs to be controlled acutely. You have a pressure person who's coming with pressure of 50, you need to give Timox. Perioperatively in patients of cataract, glaucoma surgeries, lens-induced glaucomas, any eye with a shallow anterior chamber can be given, and occasionally for chronic control. But however, side effects range from simple paresthesia, tingling, numbness, which is seen because of hypokalemia, and you avoid that by giving a potassium-rich diet like coconut water, bananas, potassium chloride, to more threatening like metabolic acidosis, electrolyte derangements, kidney stones, and also being seen to cause Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Excuse me. The next class and the oldest is cholinergic pilocarpine, where mechanism of action where it increases the aqueous outflow via the trabecular meshwork acting on the ciliary muscle. Because of its side effect profile and because of a lot of other drugs now, the importance of pilocarpine has slowly reduced. Dosage is 1 drop 4 times a day. Where it is used? It is used in patients of an acute angle closure attack after the pupillary ischemia has reduced. When the pupil starts becoming responsive, at that point of time, it is used to constrict the iris. In patients of plateau iris configuration, it is used for long term to keep the iris root away from the trabecular meshwork. And all patients of YAG laser iridotomy for angle closure disease need pre-treatment with pilocarpine. Important contraindications, as we know, are uveitis because it's pro-inflammatory. And any patient who's on long-term treatment, who's going to be on long-term treatment, needs to have his retinal evaluation periphery done carefully, because any patient with degenerations, lattice, hole, etc., can increase. There can be an RD because of these degenerations, because of the pull of pilocarpine. So these patients require a thorough retinal evaluation inclusive of the periphery before starting pilocarpine long term. Hyperosmotic agents, especially mannitol, we are again using quite frequently to reduce the vitreous volume. Indications again on acute angle closure attack, patients pressures are 50, 60, cannot take anything, vomiting, pain. You give mannitol, reduce the IOP, iris becomes responsive to then other medications. It's used again preoperatively in all our patients who are going to be requiring
your voice needs to be clearer. We are losing.
Now can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, this is very clear. Yes.
Okay, so it has to be so it's given preoperatively in patients of in trabeculectomies, certain cataract surgeries, etc., to reduce the vitreous volume and to deepen the chamber. Mannitol is the most common, given in 20% mannitol in the dose of 1 to 1.5 gram per kg. So in a 100 ml of mannitol bottle which comes, that's around 20 grams. So anywhere for a 50 to 60 kg a male, around 200 to 250 ml of mannitol needs to be given around 45 minutes preoperatively for its maximum effect to come during the time of the surgery. As the weight of the person reduces, you need to reduce the amount of mannitol going. So again, major adverse effects in these patients are, since mannitol takes fluid up from the extravascular space to the intravascular space, any person who's a patient of cardiac failure, is on digoxin, etc., can cause cardiac shock, can cause cardiac overload. Pulmonary edema is common in them. Also patients with renal insufficiency, that is on people who have diabetic neuropathy, care should be taken when we're giving mannitol because it can potentiate an acute renal failure. So that's very important to monitor pulse, BP for all these patients. Make sure when they are giving mannitol, they are lying stationary on the bed, should not be moving about too much in the ward. Just a quick word on fixed dose combinations. As we all can know, fixed dose combinations are basically two medications which are put together in one bottle. Basically, they are known to improve patient compliance. They have fewer side effects due to lower levels of preservatives, and you can combine drugs with various mechanisms in one bottle. So these are basically the fixed dose combination. All of them include timolol, with a new fixed drug combination of brinzolamide and brimonidine, which has come to the market probably in the last couple of years, which is the only non-beta blocker fixed drug combination. Therefore, any patient who is contraindicated for beta blocker, as I've mentioned before, this FDC can be fixed drug combination can be used for this patient. So we've seen all the drugs, and now we think, how do we manage this patient? So you know you're starting a patient on a particular drug. Once you start the drug, you wait for at least 2-3 weeks for its maximum effect to happen. You see the patient after 3 weeks, IOP is to your target IOP, that's great, you continue treatment and monitor. But if his IOP has not come down, instead of adding a medication in that point of time, it is better to substitute or change to a drug of the same class or drug of a different class. Example, if you started a latanoprost as your first drug, and if it's not reached therapeutic effect, you can switch to a bimatoprost or a travoprost and check with that, because non-responders even to subgroups of anti-glaucoma medications are commonly seen. So once you change the drug, again you wait for 2-3 weeks for its effect. If you've reached a target IOP, great, you continue treatment and monitor. But if you have not reached, and you've reached there's been an IOP reduction, but not to the effect that you want, at that point of time, you can add a medication. So this way you stepwise add medications depending on whether target IOP has been reached. And if you reach a point where despite maximum therapy, your IOP is not being controlled, you go ahead either with whatever the next step, either laser or surgery. A very important point here that all open angle glaucomas are not going to remain open angle glaucomas for the rest of their life. You have creeping angle closure. As the lens thickness increases, the iris lens diaphragm forward, there is forward movement of the iris lens diaphragm. So gonioscopy, even for the open angle spectrum of disease, is very important every 6 months, at least once a year, and keep monitoring them and check for their angle closure. And if angle closure develops in the future, you treat it accordingly. So now we follow up. We've started the treatment. We've reached the target IOP. We wait for 3 to 4 weeks before stabilizing treatment. Very important in this is in the first year of diagnosis, you try to do maximum perimetry or maximum fields as possible, because we all know that there are learning defects in fields, which was explained yesterday as well. To make your progression analysis more accurate, it's very important that you have good baseline tests. So doing more tests in the first year and a half helps you to eliminate the non-reliable fields and helps you to get good reliable baselines, which will make your progression analysis accurate. Once disease is stable, pressures are okay, perimetry is stable, 6 monthly checkups are fine for mild disease, moderate disease, probably for ocular hypertensives, and investigations every year. For moderate to severe disease, however, you need to keep checking them every 2-3 months. They may require more closer follow-up as far as IOP checkups and perimetry is concerned, which may be done at least probably once in 6 months. Again, I repeat, follow-up is tailored to every patient, and progression, both structural and functional, has to be checked. However, functional progression in the form of perimetry progression is definitely more important as compared to structural. So this we've completed a little bit of management of the primary glaucomas, but just a slide on secondary glaucomas, which you all know are glaucomas which have a reason which are causing the increase in pressure. And few of the most common ones, first being a steroid-induced glaucoma. So you have a steroid-induced glaucoma. First thing and the most important which you need to do is taper and stop the offending agent. The offending agent can be either a topical drop, it can be an oral medication, it can be an inhalational use for bronchial asthma, it can be a skin ointment, lotion, anything, but you need to taper and stop it and balance with appropriate topical anti-glaucoma medications. It's very important that you wait for steroid washout. Steroid remains in the system for at least 4 to 6 weeks again. So it's not that once you've started the medication, the IOP comes down, you stop the medication. No, you have to continue till the steroid washout occurs, and then only do you stop the medication. Many patients of intermediate uveitis, etc., have received a posterior subtenon injection. So very important to look for to evert the eye properly and look for any steroid depot. And in case the IOP does not reduce with medications, you may require removal of the depot as well. Any patient of uveitis needs to be treated again properly with steroids and cycloplegics, because uveitis can cause secondary glaucoma. Normal uveitis which causes increase in IOP are basically Fuchs uveitis, Posner-Schlossman, and viral keratouveitis, which causes a trabeculitis. Treating IOP only in them is of no significance. The inflammation needs to be treated with antivirals in the proper initiation and maintenance dose. Any vascular occlusion, BR, VOCR, branch retinal vein occlusion, or central retinal vein occlusion requires a proper retinal evaluation with proper PRP before you can think of glaucoma management in the form of surgery. You use drops definitely, but a proper retinal PRP is very important for these patients as well. Acute postoperative IOP spikes. You have sometimes post-cataract surgery, IOP remains high for a week, which is quite normal and it reduces once you start medications. But for some reason, post 1 week also pressure is high. We need to look for retained viscoelastic in these eyes. There won't be any aqueous currents in these eyes, and any patient whose angles are compromised, the viscoelastic may take a longer time. So you need to look for it, and if that's the case, you need to remove it. Any retained epinucleus, any retained cortex in the eye is a cause of increased IOP, needs to be looked at. Post-VR surgery, excessive silicone oil in the eye causes a shallow anterior chamber, excessive gas fill. Whatever you do with these eyes, IOP will not reduce unless you remove the excess silicone oil or the gas. Any lens-induced glaucoma, phacomorphic, phacolytic glaucomas, lens has to be removed. That is the most important. If it's a acute lens-induced glaucoma, 2-3 days, in most of these cases, only the cataract removal reduces IOP well. Once we finish secondary glaucomas, we are looking at again normal tension glaucoma and additional strategies. As I said, that treatment of normal tension glaucoma requires a more all-round approach, requires a more in-depth history taking. So in any patient of normal tension glaucoma, you have to look for history of migraine, cluster headaches, small joint pains, rheumatoid arthritis, any vasospastic disorder, and that needs to be treated accordingly. History of nighttime antihypertensives, reduction of nighttime perfusion pressure because of nocturnal hypertension is known to be a risk factor for increasing optic nerve damage. So any patient of glaucoma who's on a night-term antihypertensive, you need to get the history and ask them to change it to a morning or evening dose in consultation with their primary physician. People of sleep apnea need to get sleep apnea treated. A lot of people to detoxify themselves drink 1.1 to 1.5 liters in the morning as soon as they get up. That causes a temporary load on the trabecular meshwork, causing a transient IOP spike, which can cause optic nerve head damage in susceptible eyes. Therefore, taking this history and asking them to stop it is very important. History of breath holding exercises, pranayams, certain upside down head yoga postures, all have been shown to increase optic nerve damage, have to be asked for, have to be stopped. Any history of major accident or blood loss in the past indicates that there could be some sort of shock in the past and can cause an optic nerve head damage resembling a normal tension glaucoma. This history needs to be taken as well. So this is not important only for diagnosis, but also for treatment of any normal tension glaucoma. Basic imaging of MRI brain and carotid Doppler studies are important as far as management of normal tension glaucoma is concerned. Just a quick slide on what are the safe drugs in pregnancy. No drug is absolutely safe. Brimonidine has been shown to be a category B drug, so can be used in pregnancy relatively carefully because it does not cross the blood placental barrier. But rest, all of the anti-glaucoma medications are contraindicated, especially PG analogs, which can act as an abortivation. Important question as far as recent advances in your vivas, in DNB exams, and people who are interested to give your FICO exam in the future is concerned is newer drugs. Just a quick mention that Ripasudil is a drug which has come into the Indian market recently, which is a Rho kinase inhibitor. But the drug which is of more significance, according to me, is Netasudil, which is 0.02%, which is a combined Rho kinase and a norepinephrine transport inhibitor. A ROCK inhibitor basically acts by acting on the trabecular meshwork, on the cell structure, integrity, and the acting component of the trabecular meshwork. It changes its size and shape and therefore makes it more easy for activists to flow and reduces the outflow resistance. The norepinephrine transport inhibitor sort of reduces blood supply to the ciliary processes and reduces aqueous humor, and it reduces episcleral venous pressure as well. Sorry. This received US FDA approval late in 2017. Brand name is Ropressa. I do not have any financial interest. The second important drug is latanoprostene bunode, which is a nitric oxide donating prostanoid receptor agonist. So basically, when you put it in the eye, it's metabolized into two components. One is latanoprost acid, which basically acts like a normal PG analog, increasing your uveosteral outflow, and butynatriol mononitrate, which acts as a nitric acid donor. It relaxes the trabecular meshwork and increases outflow to the trabecular meshwork as well. So both the outflow pathways are acted upon by this particular drug, and this received US FDA approval late in 2017. Brand name in Vysulta. This is not available in the Indian scenario as yet, but in the near future, we think these drugs will come and will play an impact as far as our glaucoma management is concerned. So this is a little bit on open angle glaucoma segment. We'll just go to a little bit of the angle closure spectrum. The same protocol we follow the entire gamut of the evaluation protocol, and we do the gonioscopy. Now, earlier, European Glaucoma Society guidelines told us that a 3-quadrant closure, 270-degree closure is what classifies as angle closure disease. But the CGIC changed its in 2003-4, and because they were missing out a lot of angle closure and have reduced it to 180 degrees. So the posterior trabecular meshwork not visible in 180 degrees without indentation with the smallest possible slit constitutes an occludable angle. If this angle, if IOP is normal, no pass and normal disc, it comes as primary angle closure suspects. With peripheral anterior synechia, with plus minus raised IOP and a normal disc is primary angle closure. And any of this with a glaucomatous defect with or without a perimetry field is a primary angle closure glaucoma. So this is your entire spectrum of primary angle closure disease. As we all know, any primary angle closure glaucoma, first step has to be an iridotomy and relieve the pupillary block. And then follow up the patient depending on what I've said as an open angle. You follow up the disc, you see what the pressure is like, and taper treatment accordingly. In patients of primary angle closure suspects, all of them do not need to undergo a peripheral iridotomy. Patients who had higher risk, example, if the other eye is of a primary angle closure glaucoma, if there's family history, documented family history of angle closure, if he's a diabetic, requires repeated retinal evaluations, or is unable to follow up to eye care, you can go ahead with a YAG PI in these patients, but not in all. Important again in all in these is that once you do a PI, regular gonioscopy every 6 months is must to keep documenting the amount of K which may increase in these patients. So basically lasers in glaucoma, the first and the most important is a YAG peripheral iridotomy. As I said, the indications are of primary angle closure disease and primary angle closure suspects. Again, important indication is patients of iris Bombay. Those patients with uveitis who have a 360-degree occlusio pupillae have an iris Bombay, and you need to do an urgent YAG PI in them in the mid-peripheral iris where the protrusion of the iris red is maximum. Multiple PIs are required in these patients because they have a high chance of getting blocked. And also because of secondary angle closure, you have the lens coming forward because of subluxation causing a pupillary block. You need to do a PI in these patients. So quickly, I'll just go through what are the important questions as far as a peripheral iridotomy is concerned. First is preferably to bring the IOP down in the normal range. If the IOP is high, reduce it down with medications, and then you go ahead with the YAG iridotomy. Pre-treatment on the day of laser with 2% pilocarpine, 1 drop every 15 minutes, and you check for the constriction of the eye, that the pupil should not react. Important when you make the patient sit down, you should sit comfortably and instill Paracaine eye drops. Position of the laser is important. You have to look for crypts, which are the holes or the defects in the iris, the depth, the defects in the iris. At that point of time, the iris, at that location, the iris is at its thinnest and therefore will require the least power for the PI. Traditional teaching tells us that we avoid positions 9 and 3 because of the long ciliary nerves, which can get damaged because of the laser and have an effect on pupillary dilatation later on. And we want to avoid iridotomy at 12 o'clock because if you've not focused properly, there can be bubble generation in the aqueous because of the laser, and the bubbles can go and sit at the 12 o'clock position, and you cannot, and it will hamper the visualization of your laser. Conventional teaching again tells us that anywhere between at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock is the ideal position. But again, recent guidelines as far as peripheral iridotomy comes also tells us that you should avoid iridotomy at any position where the lid margin and the tear interface meet each other. So example, any of these positions where the lid margin and the tear interface meets each other should be avoided because the refraction of light which occurs in these spaces is irregular and can increase the chances of getting ghost images, of getting blurred images, of getting all the side effects of peripheral iridotomy. So avoid these positions as well. Start with a low power, and when you're doing iridotomy, look for a gush of aqueous and pigment. Should be sufficiently large, and use mild steroid drops for 3 to 5 days after doing the iridotomy. Very important is to examine the patient IOP wise, gonioscopy wise, at least a week after the PI. Look for how much is the angle opened, if it has opened or not. Look for K again, document it, and this will have to keep continuing later on as well. Very important is that in few very thick irises, you may have to do sequential iridotomy, that first with an argon laser, and then you thin out that area, and then use a YAG laser to cause the disruption. Laser iridoplasty, which is the next laser which is used to contract and flatten the peripheral iris. It is used in these particular peripheral iris points to cause contraction of the iris and pull it from the angle. Indications and initial treatment of acute angle closure attack, if medications are not working, pulling the iris will sort of open up the angles in patients of plateau iris configuration. However, there is damage to the iris, and we are not too sure as to what the long-term effect of iridoplasty is. Therefore, it's not very often clinically done in our day-to-day practice. Laser trabeculoplasty that was iridoplasty. This is trabeculoplasty, which is done basically to the trabecular meshwork, and this is a laser done only for open angle glaucomas. There are basically two types: argon laser trabeculoplasty and selective laser trabeculoplasty, basically ALT and SLT. And indications are primary therapy in any ocular hypertensive, and they work especially in pseudoexfoliation pigmentary glaucomas. It is used as an adjunct to medical therapy where there's allergy to multiple anti-glaucoma medications, used in pregnancy. So just a few differences: that the spot size of SLT is larger, where it occupies the entire trabecular meshwork. The spot size of ALT is smaller and used at the junction of the anterior and the posterior trabecular meshwork. The exposure time and the heat which is given to the trabecular meshwork is much less in SIT as compared to ALT. Basically, there are mechanical and biological theories, but the mechanical theory says that the ALT causes thermal damage to the thermal induced collagen and tissue contraction of the trabecular meshwork. Therefore, this makes the trabecular meshwork tighter and increases aqueous outflow. The biological theory, which is more on the lines of which the SIT works, is that it generates cytokine productions, it generates matrix metalloproteinases, which actually act as scavengers, and they eat up all the debris which is there in the angle and therefore increase the aqueous outflow. The lens used is a Latina lens. The ALT has much more thermal injury induced trabecular meshwork scarring and damage. Therefore, the SIT is preferred. However, you have to understand in almost 20 to 25% of patients, the SIT may show no change to the IOP at all. So this needs to be informed to the patient prior. It is expensive. Long-term IOP control may not happen and you need to repeat procedures, and access to an SIT machine is quite limited even in a city like Bombay. So we may not be able to offer this treatment to all our patients. So this was medical and laser, and I'll be taking only 3 or 4 slides as far as surgical approach is concerned. Surgical therapy again is a vast topic which requires again probably 2 hours. Trabeculectomy, as we all know, is a gold standard as far as glaucoma surgery is concerned. It involves creation of a partial thickness scleral flap which allows aqueous to flow between the anterior chamber and the subconjunctival space. It is used along with antimetabolites like mitomycin C, which reduces fibroblasts and reduces the healing response. So when do you do a trabeculectomy? You do it when medically your primary glaucoma is uncontrolled. You've used maximum therapies, you've done your lasers, not controlled. Trabeculectomy is TRAB is the next option. As a combined procedure along with cataract surgery, you have a patient who's undergoing cataract surgery. He is a moderate glaucoma, mild glaucoma, medication controlled on a couple of drops. It's a good idea to combine trabeculectomy with them because you're doing it in one procedure and you reduce the dependence of anti-glaucoma drops in the future. Juvenile open angle glaucoma, as Dr. Deshmukh explained.
I am moderating one session.
Hello?
Moderate peripheral session.
Yeah, so juvenile open angle glaucoma, which is a high tension glaucoma, is seen in people of age group of 20 to 30. And since they have a long life ahead of them, doing an early surgery, a threshold for trabeculectomy will be less in these patients. Few secondary glaucomas. Any patient who is non-affordable to glaucoma medications or is non-compliant, your threshold for glaucoma surgery reduces, and you combine it with a trabeculotomy in treating severe cases of congenital glaucoma. So what does an ideal bleb, what all of us glaucoma specialists and ophthalmologists who do TRABs aim for? An ideal bleb is a bleb which is diffuse, it is minimally elevated, minimum vascularization, which is similar to the surrounding conjunctiva, presence of cystic changes or microcysts, and of course you want normal IOPs. This is what all of us aim for, hope for, but not all of us get this particular bleb. I'm sure Dr. Preeti will be getting this bleb much more often compared to somebody like me. So you may land up with something like this, which is a localized, elevated, tense looking bleb, which is something called as an encapsulated bleb. So your pressure will be high in these patients. Because of a thick cyst wall, there is no drainage of the aqueous from this posteriorly, and this is called an encapsulated bleb. Again, in the high IOP segment, you have something like this, vascularized, reddish, angry looking bleb, surrounding conjunctiva as red. This is a vascularized bleb. Again, this is a bleb which is absolutely flat. Again, a little reddish looking, pressures are high, not opening with massage. This is what we call as a flat or non-functional, a fade bleb. These are all in the high IOP post-TRAB segments. This is a low IOP post-TRAB segment. You have low pressures, a shallow bleb, a shallow anterior chamber. You do a Siegel's test, and this is what you get, a leaking bleb. And again, a nightmare for all glaucoma surgeons, where you have a large, diffuse, elevated bleb, shallow anterior chamber, probably choroidals behind, and this is an overfiltering bleb. Management of all these is a different ballgame altogether, which we can cover sometime else. A quick word on glaucoma drainage devices. There are 2 glaucoma drainage devices which are there, barbed or non-barbed, and the EMA glaucoma valve is a barbed device. There are basically elastomer membranes in the valve, which is then the body of the EMA glaucoma valve, which prevents the pressure in the anterior chamber from reducing to less than 8 or 6. So relatively safer, avoids hypotony, though not in all cases. And the non-barbed examples are the barbed implant or the ADI, which is an Indian version of the barbed. Indications of a GDD are any patient in which there's a high chance of conventional TRAB failure. So any failed previous trabeculectomy, 1 or 2, indication of a GDD. neovascular glaucoma, advanced angle closure stage, Cynic K, you have a membrane at the angle, your glaucoma surgery is not going to work. You do a GDD, a valve, a refractory glaucoma, uveitic glaucoma. Again, your high chances of failure of the trab, a valve. In situations like iridocorneal endothelial syndromes, post-PK glaucoma, etc., you don't even try for a trabeculectomy in them. You go straight in for a glaucoma drainage device, because for them there is no role at most of these cases. Your trab will survive. Post VR surgery glaucomas, a lot of VR surgeons open up extensively the conjunctiva, put a bed buckle and suture it in haphazard ways, and there's complete conjunctival fibrosis. Sorry, Swapnesh, don't mind if you're there. All these patients may not, a primary trabeculectomy will not work, and you need to go ahead with a glaucoma drainage device. Patients of aphakic glaucoma, severe childhood glaucomas are indications of a valve. So this is just a photograph of an MS glaucoma valve. This is a photograph of a valve in a post-PKI. And these are pictorial representations of the RD and the barbet. Look how similar they look. And my last slide is just a cyclodestructive procedure, which is cyclophotocoagulation, which can either be transcranial or endoscopic endo-CPC. Indications we all know are painful, blindness, no visual prognosis, but the risk of an institutional surgery is very high. There is not much benefit out of it. Failed multiple surgeries. In many secondary glaucomas where visual prognosis is poor, it can be done as a primary procedure itself. And important complications are inflammation, phthisis, etc., etc., etc. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity. I know it's been quite expensive. Thank you to my alma mater, Shankar Nethralaya, for making me what I am today. And the place where I work in right now is Lotus Eye Hospital. My email ID given here is mayavjm@gmail.com. Anybody having any questions, doubts, anything you want to ask, you can email me with ease, no problem at all. I'll answer all your questions at any point of time.
Maya, that was really extensive. And yes, you need that glass of water that you're drinking. So now we have quite a bit of questions. Many of them I have answered during your talk, but I thought one particular, yes. So one particular question is combined surgery versus individual surgery. So Maya, can you just answer that question, please? CAT plus TRABs versus only TRAB. What are the indications for CAT plus TRAB? That's what he's asked.
So indications for a plain trab would be a patient whose probably cleanse is relatively clear. Pressures are not being controlled on medications. You have no option. You go ahead with a plain surgery in a plain trabeculectomy in that patient. Now, a similar patient who is 65, 70 has an NS1, NS2. Pressures are not controlled. You need to go ahead with a glaucoma surgery. You can combine a cataract and glaucoma surgery in that patient. So no fixed criteria as yet, but if a cataract surgery is inevitable and patient is on a couple of drops, is a patient of moderate glaucoma, doing a combined surgery in this patient is helpful because it reduces the dependence of anti-glaucoma drops in the future, and it's a single sitting. So you are finishing off in one sitting. Although studies do tell us that the success rate of plain trabeculectomy is more as combined to a combined surgery, but a combined surgery I think is relatively easier and will, if done properly, will give you a similar result. I'm sure Dr. Preeti will be able to elaborate on them.
See, one is that you have to remember that you have to do what you are comfortable with. Some people are very, as you develop in your practice, you grow in your practice, you'll become more comfortable with CAT with TRABs. So this you have to discuss with patients that only TRAB has a higher, as Maya already has said, that only TRABs have a greater success rate than CAT plus TRAB. Also, only cataracts have a better, success in the sense, a cleaner surgery than CAT plus TRAB. But however, you have to tell the patient that after cataract, if you decide that first I'm going to do a TRAB, and then after say 3-4 months I'll do a TRAB, the cataract, the chance that your TRAB may fail after the cataract surgery is also there. So you have to judge. But however, in very advanced cases, we prefer to do trabeculectomy alone, wait for some time, and then do a cataract at a later sitting. But all this you have to explain to the patient, make him understand that after TRAB he is not going to see clearly. In fact, his visual will go down because the cataract will progress. So one is that there is no clear answer. You have to do what you are comfortable. If it is an advanced glaucoma, you may do a trap first, you do a sequential surgery, and if the person is very well controlled with a single medication, then you can do only cataract surgery and then continue the medication. But all this you have to talk it with the patient and then proceed. So I don't know if that answers your question. So there is another Prerna has mentioned, Moya, that you mentioned about history of major accident. Disc pallor will be more than glaucomatous damage in case of NTG. So differentiating between NTG and I think traumatic disc damage or any other cause of disc damage. I think that is what she means. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
See, it is, you can have optic nerve head pallor along with a glaucomatous optic disc damage in such a patient. But it is important to note that in such a patient, this is an event in the past. So you can have a glaucomatous looking disc, but there won't be any progression if the glaucomatous damage and the pallor is purely because of that one event which has happened in the past. So you treating this patient as far as IOP control right now may not serve much purpose because this is not a progressive glaucoma. So an important thing what I'm trying to make in this is you see a patient having some sort of glaucomatous damage along with a visual field defect, but his pressures are absolutely normal. You start off treatment and you follow this patient up and you see subsequent perimetries. The perimetries also absolutely normal. There's no change at all. So this tells you that this is a burnt out glaucoma or one-time event which has happened in the past. So getting that history and then probably stopping the medication is important because you don't need to give that medication to that patient at all.
See, I had to clarify one or two points. That one is, Maya mentioned in India we have at least 4 PGs available, prostaglandins. So in all these 4, though the IOP control is almost similar, but however, the best acting PG, a prostaglandin analog is the least acting and the best acting. The best acting, but however, also has the highest number of side effects is bimatoprost. So if you want a good IOP reduction, then you should use bimatoprost. But the periocular pigmentation, the inflammation is going to be much more with bimatoprost as compared to others. And the one with the least effective is latanoprost, but it is the most, patient friendly, in eye friendly, in the sense the congestion is less, the periorbital changes are less. So in between PGs, the best is the IOP reduction is best with bimatoprost and the least with latanoprost, and tafluprost and travoprost are in the middle spectrum. So one more question. Role of PGs in NTG. You want to answer that question, Maya?
See, role of prostaglandins in normotension glaucoma.
Yes.
So again, as I said, prostaglandin analogs are the drug of choice in any in most primary glaucomas because it has the maximum IOP lowering effect, and it is the most likely to be compliant for a patient because it's once a daily dosage. So giving a prostaglandin analog is probably what I also use in patients of normotension glaucoma if to as a first line as an IOP reducing agent. I avoid using alpha agonists in patients. I avoid using beta blockers in normotension glaucomas because they've been known to increase glaucomatous progression according to the low tension glaucoma treatment study as compared to an alpha agonist. The alpha agonist is known to be a slightly more neuroprotective in these patients as well. So beta blockers is something which I would avoid in a normotension glaucoma patient. But starting a PG analog in a normotension glaucoma patient because you ideally require a 30% IOP drop is what is used. Anything different, Dr. Preeti?
Okay. So now, do we need to re-establish baseline IOP and fields following TRAB? Yes, you do need to. And whenever you use the statistical data to see if the fields are progressing, you also need to re-establish the baseline. All right. Even when you are taking a printout, if the printout is taken according to the old baseline, you will have progression even when there is a stable IOP. So yes, you need to re-establish baseline IOP and fields following TRAB. I would say you should also take a fresh this picture after TRABs. What should be the target IOP in such a controlled IOP? I didn't follow the question. What do you
Ma'am,
mean?
there are a couple of questions from Swapnesh in the beginning. Have you answered them? He's asked about prostaglandin associated periorbitopathy and an approach to an NVG case. Have you discussed that in this thing?
Sorry?
That is yet to be discussed, sir.
That is yet to be discussed. Okay, because that is quite in the beginning.
Which one?
Dr. Swapnesh's questions at measures to avoid PAP, which is prostaglandin associated periorbitopathy, and an approach to a patient of neovascular disease, neovascular glaucoma.
Okay, no, we have to go into PAP. I did not understand what is PAP. Now I know.
Okay, so
yes.
Swapnesh, basically you cannot avoid it.
Yeah,
The drug is going into the eye, and if the effect is going to come, it's going to come. There's nothing which you can do about it. However, the effect is reversible. So if you want to stop, you stop the drop, and within a few months, gradually the orbital fat, everything increases, the ptosis slightly reduces, and you get the eye back to as close as to what the other eye is. But you cannot avoid a prostaglandin associated periorbitopathy.
I mean, it is said that you use cotton, you don't spread the drop around, but even with whichever technique you use, you will still get the periorbital orbitopathy and neovascular glaucoma. Yeah. So neovascular glaucoma is a huge topic by itself. But Maya, you want to answer that question?
So basically, when I'm seeing a patient of neovascular glaucoma which has come into the OPD and the pressure is high in that patient is not on any medications, my first goal would be to reduce the medications as much as possible medically as quickly as possible. So patient if the patient requires mannitol, use mannitol. If the patient requires Dimox, give him Dimox. Give him anti-glaucoma medications. I would prefer to start off with a beta blocker, timolol. So basically, dorzolamide, imodidine, and timolol would be my first line of action. Hope and pray that with this, the corneal edema and pressure reduces. I'm able to get a better look at the eye. At this point of time, if the cornea clears and you are able to have a good look at the retina behind, I would request my retina colleague to start doing the PRP well as early as possible and do a tight PRP. If the PRP is done well, if the burns are significant, you will automatically start seeing a reduction in the neovascularization process of the NVI or the NVA. At this point of time, I will also do a proper gonioscopy to see if at all how much of the angle is involved. If we are early, if we've got the disease process early and the angle is relatively open, this eye has a better prognosis compared to somebody who's come in late with a closed angle. At this point of time, with an open angle, the pupil dilates also better, and with good PRP and medications, you may be able to get the pressures down without requiring any need to do any surgical procedure. But again, important in this is a very good tight PRP. Multiple settings are required and the PRP has to be done really well. At this situation, I go ahead from there. If the retina person tells me PRP has been done maximally, neovascularization reduced, if pressures are still on the higher side and if I've waited enough and there is some sort of visual potential in the eye, I will decide for surgery. If my angle is still relatively well, is open, there is not much of angle closure, not much of synechiae, I may still give an attempt of a primary trabeculectomy in this case, because that has a better chance of, it has a better chance of survival and may give me a better result. But at this situation, if I feel that my angles are completely zipped up, there is too much of synechial angle closure. There's a membrane which has formed there, and there may not be much chance of my trabeculectomy surviving. I may go ahead directly for a primary valve in this situation. So understanding what the angle status is like, what the visual status is like, is very important in these patients. And keep checking these. And in case so this is what is done if the pressure reduces in the first instance itself. If the pressure remains high in the first instance itself, you're not able to do a PRP, there is neovascularization of the iris, then I may need to go in with a surgical procedure earlier in that case, which according to me at this point of time would be a primary valve surgery, because again in such a congested eye, doing a trap is a recipe for disaster. Give intravitreal an anti-VEGF 48 to 72 hours before I plan any surgical procedure to reduce the NVI and the NVA in this patient, and then only go ahead with the procedure. And then once the cornea clears, you give it to your retina colleague and ask him to do a good PRP. But whatever you do it, your aim is to get a clear cornea and to reduce IOP so that he can do at least a retinal cryopexy or a good PRP.
See,
Thank you, Maya.
just one thing I wanted to differ. Now, the neovascular glaucomas which I have managed, they come in two situations. One is when their pressures are low, not low, but not very high. You can see the retina. That time you proceed with PRP as Maya has mentioned. But there are some patients in whom, come what may, the pressure does not go down, in whom you plan an early surgery. Now, with the advent of these injections by which we can control or decrease the neovascularization, trabeculectomies primary have an excellent result. So I have a series of about 18 cases which I have done a prospective study, in which in only one case I had to reduce, 2 trabs failed, and then I had to do a valve. In all of them, the primary trabeculectomy is functioning even after 3 to 4 years. So with the advent of these injections, where we can anti-VEGFs, we can have a good and less inflammatory post-trab period, the success of trab is excellent. So I would say do not give up on trabeculectomies even in neovascular glaucomas. The success rate has increased dramatically with anti-VEGFs. So I would say PRP, if IOP is controlled, then continue medical management. Do not use pilocarpine in these patients. That is one drop which is contraindicated. All of the PGs, yes, some people say that there is inflammatory response with PGs, but no, it's an imagined thought. So if anything which helps you, including oral acetazolamide, you should start. Do your PRP. If the pressure is controlled, then well and good, you don't need any surgery. If the pressure is not controlled, but you have the pressure comes down, you can still go ahead with 3-4 sittings of PRP and then do your surgery. But do not give up on primary trabeculectomies. They work very, very well. And then I tried 2 trabeculectomies. In many patients, I've had to do them twice and they are functioning. So only in one patient, I had to resort to an AGV. So message is, do not give up on trabs even in neovascular glaucoma. Sumit had one question. Among combination drugs, they have prostaglandin and beta blockers combination too. How do we keep dosage of these drugs? We give them once a day. Typically, it is said that you should use this because timolol, the effect at night is not very good. We try to give them in the morning. But then I have learned whenever the patient can remember to use the drop best is the best time to use it. So if the patient says, I cannot remember to put the drop in the morning, then even though it is a timolol prostaglandin combination, you can, and patient says, I will definitely put it at night, then that is the right time to put. Though if given a choice, you should put it in the morning if it's a prostaglandin timolol combination.
And ma'am, single prostaglandin in the evening, right?
In the evening, yes. Only prostaglandins we give in the evening. We prefer to give it because studies were shown that the best effect was when they were given in the evening. But then if the compliance is and adherence is going to be an issue, we say whenever the person can remember. But most patients remember to put it at night. That they keep it next to their bedside, and whenever they sleep here, they put one drop and they go off to bed. So that is the best time to put it, and that's why sometimes even when it is with timolol, I tell them if you can remember it better at night, fair enough, you put it at night. Though preferably you would want to put it in the morning, the combination drop.
Okay, thank you.
Madam, there's one more question on steroid responders in allergy. A clinical scenario where there is allergy, steroids are being used, IOP is high, but it may not be always possible to withdraw it. Should we switch to a lower strength steroid? So how is the management to manage the IOP as well as not compromise on the allergy part?
Okay, see, steroid, yes, difluprednate has the highest steroid response, and the loteprednol has the lowest steroid response. But in my experience, loteprednol does not work at all in severe allergies where you cannot withdraw the steroid. Loteprednol does not work very well. So if there is a steroid response for allergies, then you have to find some way of reducing the steroids and using non-steroidal preparations. But if the steroid response is in uveitic patients, then you have to control the intraocular, you have to use the steroids, control the uveitis with whatever steroid you want. The intraocular pressure we will control in whichever way, even surgical options. So if it is a steroid response to a allergic condition, then yes, you have to use a non-steroidal drop, because you do not justify doing trabeculectomy for an allergy. But if it's a uveitic patient and there's a steroid response, then you use all the steroids you want to control the uveitis, but we will control the intraocular pressure in medical or surgical methods. That is not a problem. So these are the two differences when you have steroid response to different conditions.
Ma'am, just to add a sub question here, like how soon you should start an AGM? Suppose there is a 15-year-old child allergy and I started medication, steroids, and after 2 weeks, patient comes with the pressure of 40 millimeters of mercury. So if I stop the steroids, it will come down normal within a 1 or 2 weeks. So should I immediately start anti-glaucoma and stop the steroids, or I just should stop the steroids and wait for AGM to be started or not to be started?
See, in many of these patients whom you have followed up and there is no disc damage, you are fairly justified in, you don't need to immediately start intensive medical therapy for glaucoma. But if the pressure is say 40, maybe for some time, because your pressure of 40 is not a very comfortable pressure. So you can start one anti-glaucoma medication, control, taper the steroids, and then measure and stop the anti-glaucoma medication depending on the response. But if there is a disc damage, I mean, if the patient has been putting steroids for months together or years together and there is disc damage, then the scenario is different. Here you are talking about a steroid response which you have detected early, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Any other question?
Yeah, ma'am, there is one clinical scenario by Dr. Divya, that is primary angle closure with occlusio pupillae, quite eye, no reaction with the mature cataract, IOP between 30 to 34. And what is the plan of management? She has given again a sub scenarios. If the patient is PL positive, what will be the management? And if the patient is PL negative, what will be the management with other eye being normal?
Oh, Maya, you want to answer that, please?
So IOP is of 30, 34. Is it on maximum medications, or is this on without medications, or what?
Sir, we'll consider it on the maximum medication.
So if this is a maximum medications, it's a total cataract, a PL positive eye, ultrasound if it is normal, and the patient says that she was seeing some sort of vision in that eye, would prefer combined cataract plus trabeculectomy in this patient. Important to note in this is that the management of the cataract can be in any way what the doctor finds comfortable. Combined small incision cataract surgery, or an extracapsular cataract extraction, or a phaco with a trab, depending on what is the most comfortable for the doctor who's operating, is important in this patient. My point of putting in this is that you can use any form of cataract surgery along with the trabeculectomy in this patient. And if it's PL negative and you are pretty sure it's PL negative, then probably, and if it's asymptomatic, then I would suggest just leave the patient on symptomatic treatment, a little bit of ibuprofen and some drops. And the patient is symptomatic, patient is complaining of pain, redness, this, that, we can do some sort of cyclophotocoagulation to reduce the pain.
Okay. I think that covers all, sir, except for one
There is
question.
one question: how aggressively should a patient with pseudoexfoliation be treated? See, one is that pseudoexfoliation can progress much more faster and is a little more difficult to treat than primary open angle glaucomas. But the thing is that if with drops, one thing is you have to follow them more closely, because they tend to lose control more easily. So it is not how aggressively, you cannot leave them alone for say 6 months ke baad aana. You should not say that. Treat every 3 months, you check their pressures, because their pressures will go out of control very soon. So it is not how aggressively should you treat, how often should you call them for follow-up. That is how different it should be.
Yeah, ma'am, I agree with that completely, that the patients of pseudo exfoliation can go downhill very quickly. So once you've reached your target IOP, you should not be easy. You should follow them up very closely. And also they develop angle closure disease also quicker because the zonules of the lens are a little looser because of the pseudoexploratory material. So monitoring the angles is also very important to be done closer than normal, and keep watching out for angle closure in them and doing the PI earlier compared to any other open angle glaucoma. However, the treatment strategy as far as getting your target IOPs and etc. would be quite similar, but require closer follow-up and probably more perimetries and more gonioscopies to catch if they are progressing quicker compared to anybody else.
Okay. Now, yes, one question which I wanted to ask is, how many of you stop? It's a question again Divya has asked, that, not Divya, sorry, Anshu has asked that, do we stop PG analogs prior to, she has asked in response to trabeculectomy. So Maya, do you stop your any drops? Forget about PG drops. Do you stop your anti-glaucoma medications prior to trabeculectomy?
Yeah, so three things. One is that when I'm planning for trabeculectomy, I see what the ocular surface is like for a few weeks prior to the trabeculectomy. Means I keep in mind looking at the ocular surface. If I find that the ocular surface is a very congested, very red, multiple allergies to glaucoma medications, etc., I would like giving a soft steroid to these patients for a few days before the trabeculectomy to keep the conjunctiva, to reduce the congestion of the conjunctiva and to keep it relaxed. I can, I can also cover it, since I'm giving it only a few days to a week before the planned trap. I can also cover it with a little bit of oral acetazolamide. I do not stop any medications per se before any trabeculectomy. I continue all medications till the day of the surgery. Although, however, there is a particular set of thought where it says that you should stop a prostaglandin analog a few days before surgery because you reduce the inflammation in the eye, but not necessarily followed by glaucoma specialists worldwide. So I don't stop any medication before surgery, but I would probably add, if I find the surface is too congested, a steroid drop a few days, 7-10 days before the surgery, and reduce the congestion of the conjunctiva. Yeah. Anything else, ma'am?
So one is, even I do not stop any medication before trabeculectomy or even cataract surgery. But however, there is a group of surgeons who stop all glaucoma medications 2 weeks before surgery. And I'll tell you, these practices we all develop depending on our response or our results when we operate. So there are some surgeons who stop all medications. There are some surgeons like me and Maya who do not stop any medications. My reason is that 2 weeks of stopping medications does not change anything in the conjunctiva. That is one. Second thing is, there are some patients in whom the pressures are 50, and with medications I am able to get down to 30. Now, if I stop all these medications 2 weeks before surgery, so I don't know with what pressure the patient is going to land up on the OT. So I have no control over what the pressure in the OT. So I prefer to, and as Maya said, if the eye is very congested, you can start a drop of steroids. But yes, one thing is, I do stop pilocarpine before any trabeculectomy, and of course before cataract surgery we stop it quite well in advance. Even before cataract surgery, I do not stop PGs. The question another is, Maya, when do you start PGs after cataract surgery?
So I wait for at least 4 to 6 weeks after cataract surgery, because at that point of time we are pretty safe as far as pseudophakic CME is concerned. So the first 4 to 6 weeks after cataract surgery, I shifted to something else and monitor that and come back to the PG analog after 4 to 6 weeks. But I do not use it in any fresh post-op case. Fresh post-op, irrespective of cataract surgery, any surgery who comes to me with a post-op glaucoma, I'm hesitant to use a PG analog as the first line drug.
Yeah. So in this respect, almost all surgeons are unanimous that they do not start PG analogs 4 to 6 weeks after cataract surgery or trabeculectomy as the need arises. So that question we have answered.
Yes, ma'am. One more point I would like to make, as you said, was that treatment of glaucoma cannot be white, cannot be black. There are areas of gray in between.
Yes.
And every individual, every surgeon treats differently, and every patient also gets treated differently. So a lot of questions are difficult to pinpoint and say this is it, this is it, this is it, because there is no one correct answer. You can have multiple answers and all may be correct.
Yeah. So this is what it is, that this is one gray area. So different people will have different opinions You have to use your experience and derive those answers for yourself, what works best for you. What are the modifications and the steps of surgery we as PGs have to do while doing SICS to keep the pressures low? So is this in patients who have glaucoma? I have not understood the question properly. We'll go into the next. How much time do we have, Swapnesh and Sumit?
Ma'am, we'll try and answer maximum doubts and then we
Okay,
can.
so we have 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, ma'am.
All right. There was one. Okay, there was one patient. Okay, is there any difference in starting with AGMs for pseudoexfoliation? I think Mayav has answered that question. There was one patient, both eyes narrow angle, trap was done, and controlled on brimonidine plus tremolol combination for long. He developed periocular dermatitis and managed on oral steroids and immunosuppressant. Had progressing cup disc ratio. How do we manage this? Any substitutes for what is AMG?
Anti-glaucoma
AGM, I
medications.
think, anti-glaucoma medications. We tried preservative-free for same combination. See, now it is like this. Without seeing, I can tell you it is a brimonidine. Brimonidine is the culprit for that periocular dermatitis. So till you stop brimonidine, it's not going to resolve itself. And plus, you have not used, he's not on maximum medical treatment also. So there are two aspects to this. One is the periocular dermatitis, and the second is the progressive cup disc ratio. Now, progressive cup disc ratio means that maybe the intraocular pressure is not under control, and that is why the pressure, then the patient is progressing. So in both ways, your brimonidine timolol combination is not working, giving allergies. So you need to shift the patient. You should not give oral steroid and immunosuppressant to this patient. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Start them on PG analogs, maybe only timolol and timolol PG analogs, and you can also give either brinzolamide or dorzolamide, whatever you want. And now you also have sorry, I don't want to use ripasudil, which is a ROCK inhibitor. That is also what you have. So you have to stop what you are giving, stop oral steroids. It's not fair to give the patient immunosuppressants. Try to see what the pressures are, and that is the way forward. Preservative free, even it is the brimonidine which is the culprit here.
I just say one thing in these patients, that when you are educating the patient of how to put the drop, you put the drop in front of them in such a way that when the drop is put, a single drop goes directly into the inferior fornix, and you make sure that the person who's putting the drop is standing there with a tissue paper right at the edge of the lid, so there should be no percolation of the drop onto the surrounding skin of the eye at all. So that is if you can convince the patient to try that and make sure that the drop does not come onto the surrounding skin at all, especially dorzolamide causing periocular dermatitis. You can reduce that to a major extent by making sure that the drop remains in the inferior fornix only, by closing the eye, putting the head up, and making sure that the drop does not fall below the eyelid.
Yeah, but in this case, they are not even on dorzolamide. It's only.
No, I'm giving an example for any patient who's putting a drop.
Stop the brimonidine. Try all other medications. Measure the IOP more often. If the CD ratio is progressing, that means your pressures are not under control, and then you proceed. So can you provide link of recorded lecture? Yes, you can. When do you decide to put CTR in a patient of PXF? I think this is a cataract question. We will not take it. Brimonidine, is it safe in all the trimesters of pregnancy? Yes, it is. It is one of the safest drugs. And we are mainly worried in the first trimester when there is organogenesis. So brimonidine is safe, yes. But however, in the last months, brimonidine can also cause suppression of the central nervous system. So that is one time when you should not use brimonidine. So in the first trimester, brimonidine is very safe. But in the last trimester, you may try other medications where the organogenesis is complete, so you can switch to other medication. SLT is a very good option during pregnancy. Then how do you manage patients having cosmetic concerns on long-term use of PG analogs? See, there are some, now there was a time when a patient who was 60-year-old or 50-year-old would come to me and say, I don't want black circles. And I would say, come on, you're 50, 60. Why do you need to bother about that? But as now I am 50, I don't want to look like a raccoon just because I'm 50. So now this thing has changed. I do not give them PG analogs. Those patients who are very fair, younger patients, ladies, I tell them that when you use PG analogs, you're going to have this little dermatitis. But they still need PG analogs, I would go for something like latanoprost or tafluprost. Tafluprost is a very gentle PG analog. I've used and I've been surprised. There is very minimal, in about 15 to 20 patients I've used this. There is absolutely minimal periocular pigmentation and no congestion. One more thing with use of PG analogs is when their eyes are red, there is a certain economic strata where they equate red eyes to being a drunkard. So that itself has a social stigma. So with both these things, I do not use PG analogs, but however, if I have to use PG analogs, then I use either latanoprost or tafluprost. This is what you should. However, you tell them that you use tissue, do not let it spill over, you will still get periocular pigmentation. Steroids were given by dermatitis. Thank you. So we've answered all the questions.
Anything remaining, Dr. Swapnesh and Sumit, in any of the questions? All are done?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have answered most of the questions.
Sorry?
We have answered all the questions, ma'am.
All the questions we have answered, yes.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that it was a beautiful session. I enjoyed it. I don't know about the rest of the PGs, but thank you, Swapnesh. Thank you, Sumit. You're doing a great job. Maya, it was a fantastic lecture. Thank you to all our residents for attending and making it a success.
Thank
you. Good night.
Thank you, Maya. It was a very sincere lecture. Just it reflects how genuine you are with the patients also. And Preeti ma'am, it was a masterclass as usual. Thank you so much.
Good night,
Sumit.
all of you.
Yeah, thank you. So tomorrow we have a class again at the same time, 8 o'clock by Dr. Rohit Modi on uveitis approach. Again, it's a very important theoretical topic. So we'll meet at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Preeti ma'am, can I end the meeting with your permission?
Sumit, one sec. In case anybody has any questions, I've kept my email ID here. Please feel free to email me regarding any specific Viva question or theory question you have in mind, or any practice related also is absolutely okay.
And Sumit, also the YouTube link. Just tell them the name.
Yeah, so it's BOA iTalks plugged in. You can see all the videos of the lectures there, and you can ask questions in the comment section also if there is some problem or you're not able to connect with us.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Good night.
Bye, ma'am. See you. Thank you so much.
See you.